King Charles has spent 6 days in Australia, bringing joy to local tat makers as they manufacture commemorative spoons and tea mugs doomed to live for eternity on the shelves of Aussie charity shops.
Charles's first tour took him to Sydney, where he and his wife Camilla were said to be touched by projections of their images upon Sydney Opera House before heading south to the capital, Canberra, for a state reception at Parliament House. Things were going swimmingly for the Windsors until a surprise interruption, as you can hear in this clip from The Guardian.
So the protester you heard there was actually independent Australian Senator Lidia Thorpe, an Indigenous Australian woman and former member of the Australian Greens. She's long been an advocate of Australia becoming a republic and has drawn controversy over her years of service to Parliament.
Her time in the Greens was marred by a scandal that alleged that she was in a relationship with a member of a biker gang, and she controversially campaigned against Australia's failed Indigenous voice referendum, which would have established a presence for Indigenous Australians within the Australian parliamentary system. Please go back and check out our Edinburgh Fringe episode with Tom Ballard to hear more on that if you haven't heard it already.
Thorpe's objection to the voice stated that if Indigenous Australians were to accept the terms, it would have amounted to a treaty, something that none of the many groups of Indigenous Australians have ever consented to, and arguing that it would be, and I quote, an easy way to fake progress. She has instead supported the Pay the Rent campaign, named after a lyric in an iconic Indigenous rights song that encourages Australians to voluntarily pay reparations. So look, her protest directly to King Charles. You heard her there saying, give us our land back. You stole our land.
She keeps saying you're not our king as well.
Right.
Yeah. And it's, listen, as a British person, do I find it strange that our king is a king of Australia? Yes. Yeah. Incredibly strange. I find the idea of the Commonwealth genuinely strange, as both a child of Britain and also, I guess, a child of one of the countries in said Commonwealth. I do find the whole enterprise quite strange. Lidia Thorpe's protest doesn't come as a great time for Keir Starmer and 10 Downing Street, because they are actively trying to avoid discussion of reparations for slavery and the actions of the British Empire at the upcoming meeting of the leaders of the Commonwealth in Samoa that King Charles is also due to attend. The UK stated that there'll be no apology over the UK's involvement in the transatlantic slave trade.
CARICOM, a group of 15 Caribbean governments, are likely to call for reparations that could exceed $200 billion. But Starmer has said reparations were not on his agenda, which is in line with the former Tory government, who repeatedly resisted calls for a payout.
We should say this is in spite of some pressure from backbench Labour MPs. Labour MP Bel Ribera-Addy has said that the UK has a moral and legal duty to address historic injustices. And one of the former guests on the show, Clive Lewis, the MP, pointed out that David Lammy is a son of the Caribbean from Guyana. And Clive said there are high expectations that he will move the dial in their direction. Now, while Labour are resistant to pay slavery reparations, the British government did agree to pay a generous compensation package of £20 million to the slave owners for the loss of their, and I'm very heavily inverting the commas around this word, property, which amounts to about £300 million in today's money. This amounted to some 40% of the Treasury's annual income, one of the largest loans in history, and the British taxpayer only finished paying this off in 2015. That is the largest single governmental bailout until the bailout of the banking sector after the 2008 financial crisis. That fact alone should be enough to boil the blood of any right-thinking person.
I mean, look, most British people are not aware of the UK's role in colonising Australia. Well, I mean, certainly not aware of the role in, let's be frank, mass killing. Yeah. Indigenous Australians killed. I think it's fair. It's a genocide. That was a genocide. Yeah. And we have a collective amnesia about this. So Thorpe mentions in the clip, our children, our babies. So that's a reference to the stolen generation, where children of Indigenous mothers were taken from their families to live with white Australians. I mean, how grotesque is that? And it's really hard to deny that her protest, it was just incredibly successful. I mean, it put it on the world stage. We're sitting here having a conversation about it now. So, I'd have to say, if we were doing Hero of the Week, I might put her in for it.
I think that a lot of our country's historic crimes were not committed on our own soil. And as a consequence, I think we have escaped the kind of accountability that the individual countries of America and Australia maybe haven't in quite the same way. But, you know, these are all British people that are doing this. We have a weird tendency to say, well, the Australians did X, Y, and Z. I mean, I'm sorry, who were the Australians doing? You know, you're talking about a lot of British people that are involved in that. The stolen generation is one of the most brutal and evil policies it's possible to conceive of. It's astonishing.
Yeah. And it was also not that long ago, which also gives me lots of chills.
Yeah. The film Rabbit Proof Fence is one that's worth watching. It's specifically about the stolen generation. You know, I'm almost loath to bring this up, but I do think it's worth discussing just because of the lack of historical education in this country around Britain's role in the slave trade. But the former Conservative MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, it's very sweet to say former Conservative MP. It's very sweet to say that. The former Conservative MP, Jacob Rees-Mogg, was tweeting last week about the slave trade, and he said this: "They ought to pay us for ending slavery. It is not something any other country had done, and we were motivated by Christian charity." Now, the only reason I'm highlighting that, I really don't want to bring any more attention to this man. The reason I'm highlighting it is actually because it shows the lack of historical education around the slave trade. There is a total gap in our knowledge. The British complicity in the slave trade and Britain's participation in it is not something we talk about enough. And just the very fact that he said they should pay us suggests that he has absolutely no working... I mean, this is a generous interpretation. He has no working knowledge that the British government did bail out slave owners in this country. It really is something that is massively under-discussed. And to be charitable in interpreting Rees-Mogg's comments, I'm going to say that that's evidence of a profound lack of historical education in this country around the slave trade.